February 23rd, 1945, 6:15 in the morning. Moyland Wood, Rhineland, Germany. Frost clung to everything. Corporal Jacques Maro pressed his numb fingers against the cold steel of his No. 4 Mark I Lee Enfield, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. In his right hand, he held something that would have made any quartermaster furious. A dented British Army tomato tin, its paper label long since dissolved, crude holes punched through both ends and a series of smaller perforations along one side. Through his No. 32 Mark III scope, Maro studied the German positions 400 yards distant across the frozen killing ground of the Reichswald forest. The tomato tin sat wedged between two rocks 30 feet to his right, angled to a precise position he had calculated during 3 hours of careful observation the night before. At 6:27, the first weak rays of winter sun broke through the skeletal trees. The tin caught the light. A dim orange glow appeared on one side, then brightened as the sun climbed. The perforations Maro had punched created a scattered pattern of light spots that danced across the snow like embers from a dying fire. 400 yards away, a German sentry shifted position to investigate the strange lights that seemed to pulse and move without explanation. For exactly 4 seconds, his head rose above the sandbagged parapet of his fighting position. Maro's rifle spoke once. The sentry collapsed. The first kill of what would become the most psychologically devastating 4 days of the Rhineland campaign had just been recorded. Before the week was out, Maro would use variations of this technique to eliminate 137 confirmed enemy combatants, force the withdrawal of an entire German battalion from a critical defensive sector, and produce a tactical innovation that British and Canadian forces would adopt across the entire Western Front. What had begun as an accident involving morning tea and a discarded food tin would become a systematic method of psychological dominance that German forces had no counter for. The equation of survival in the Reichswald was being rewritten, not through superior firepower or brilliant operational planning, but through a farmer's cunning applied to garbage. The path to the Rhineland had begun 8 months earlier at the Canadian Infantry Training Camp at Aldershot, England. Jacques Maro, a Quebec farmer's son from Saint-Hyacinthe, had enlisted in 1942 at 20 years old. His childhood trapping muskrat and beaver in the marshes along the Yamaska River had given him something no military manual could teach: an instinctive understanding of patience, concealment, and the psychology of prey. He knew how animals behaved when they were being watched, and he had learned to use that knowledge against them. His platoon sergeant, Warrant Officer Duncan MacLeod, noticed him during live fire exercises in June 1944. While other soldiers fired with acceptable accuracy, Maro took an additional 20 seconds before each trigger pull, reading wind conditions from grasp movement that the others ignored entirely. He scored 49 out of 50 at 500 yards in rain that had other shooters struggling to hit at 300. MacLeod approached him afterward. "You shoot like a man who's been hungry. During the Depression, if I miss the rabbit, my family does not eat," Maro said. "You learn to make the first shot count." 3 days later, he received orders to report to the Canadian Sniper Training Program at Vimy Barracks. The Canadian approach in 1944 emphasized 3 principles: patience beyond ordinary human endurance, improvisation with available materials, and psychological impact on enemy morale. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chambers taught the Tactical Psychology module. "Gentlemen, you are not merely rifles with legs," Chambers told each class. "You are instruments of terror. The German army is professional, experienced, and well-trained. They can absorb casualties. What they cannot absorb is unpredictability. Your mission is to make them afraid of their own shadows, make them question everything they see, make them hesitate. In war, hesitation kills." Maro excelled at unconventional thinking. Growing up poor in Quebec had taught him that expensive tools were a luxury. You used what you had. You improvised. You made do with what was available, and you made it work. The final examination required students to remain undetected within 200 yards of instructors equipped with binoculars for 12 consecutive hours. Maro completed the exercise by coating himself in frozen mud and lying motionless in a drainage ditch. After 23 hours, the instructors declared him missing and ended the exercise. Maro stood up 15 feet from the observation post. Chambers pulled him aside afterward. "You have the patience of a stone and the cunning of a weasel. In our trade, those are compliments. But remember, the Germans are not stupid. They learn. The sniper who survives is not the one with the best hide. It is the one who makes the Germans see what is not there while missing what is." Maro deployed to Northwest Europe in August 1944, assigned to the 1st Canadian Army's Sniper Section. He fought through the Scheldt Estuary, through the flooded polders of the Netherlands, and into the frozen forests of Germany. By February 1945, he was 6 months into continuous combat. On February 19th, tragedy arrived in a way that would change everything. Maro's spotter and closest friend, Private Etienne Dufresne, was killed by a German sniper while observing enemy positions through binoculars. Dufresne had exposed himself for perhaps 5 seconds, marking machine gun nests on a map. A German sniper, concealed in a barn loft 700 yards away, made a single perfect shot through the head. Maro spent an hour motionless beside his friend's body, not from shock, but from calculation. He studied the angles. He analyzed the sight lines. He worked through the geometry of what had just happened and how to answer it. Rather than calling for artillery or attempting immediate retaliation, Maro carried Dufresne back to Canadian lines and requested permission to conduct independent sniper operations using experimental methods. Major Thomas Blackwood, commanding the Canadian Sniper Section, was facing mounting casualties from German snipers throughout the Moyland Wood sector. The Germans held excellent positions in the Reichswald. Their snipers were killing 2 to 3 Canadians daily. Blackwood was in the frame of mind to try almost anything. "What kind of experimental methods?" he asked. Maro explained. "The Germans are professionals, sir. They train to detect movement, sound, muzzle flash. They have discipline and experience, but they are also human. Humans are curious about things that do not fit patterns. I want to make them curious. I want to make them investigate things they should leave alone. That is when they die." Blackwood studied him. "You want to create distractions." "Not distractions, sir. Puzzles. Things their minds cannot leave alone. The human brain must solve puzzles. It is how we are built. If I can create puzzles, they must resolve to feel safe. They will expose themselves solving them. That is when I shoot." Blackwood approved 48 hours to demonstrate the concept. Maro would work alone with a security detail of 3 riflemen positioned defensively behind him. That night, Maro sat in his dugout working through the problem. The German sniper who had killed Dufresne was positioned masterfully. Excellent concealment in the barn loft, multiple firing positions, clear fields of fire in every direction. Binoculars could not spot him. Direct assault was suicide. Artillery would be wasted on a single sniper who would simply relocate. The only solution was to force the German to reveal himself without exposing anything worth shooting at. As Maro heated his evening ration, tinned British Army tomatoes on a Tommy cooker, the solution arrived in the form of morning light. Not yet, but in the idea of it. He was staring at the empty tomato tin when the next morning's sun caught it at an angle. The tin glowed orange-red. The light was visible but not brilliant. It looked almost like a small fire, or perhaps a reflection from glass. Maro picked it up and rotated it slowly. The glow moved, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. He set the tin down and looked at the German positions. Then he looked back at the tin. Glass and metal reflections were a constant feature of any battlefield. Experienced soldiers learned to ignore them or use them to locate enemy equipment. But what if a reflection did something unexpected? What if it moved in ways that had no obvious source? What if it created patterns that demanded investigation without offering a clear explanation? 15 minutes later, he was explaining the idea to Blackwood. "You want to use tin cans to draw German attention," Blackwood said. "Not draw, sir. Confuse. German soldiers are trained to identify reflections from binoculars and scopes. They know exactly what those look like. But if I punch holes in a tin and angle it to catch sunlight, it creates light patterns that look wrong. Not like any equipment they recognize. Not like anything their training has categorized. Their doctrine says to investigate unknown signatures. That investigation means exposure. That exposure means death." Blackwood was quiet for a moment. "You realize this sounds completely insane." "Oui, sir. The best ideas usually do." February 20th. The first experiment. Maro positioned himself 400 yards behind Canadian forward positions, overlooking a stretch of ground used by German troops rotating between defensive sectors. He had spent 4 hours before dawn placing 3 tomato tins on stakes at different locations, each punched with different patterns of holes and angled to catch morning light at specific times. He had rigged a simple string system to adjust each tin remotely. At 6:45, the sun cleared the tree line. The first tin began to glow. The pattern of perforations created spots of light that fell across the snow like scattered sparks. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then a German soldier emerged partially from a covered dugout entrance at the edge of the tree line, clearly trying to determine the source of the strange lights. He raised binoculars. Maro's rifle spoke once at 460 yards. The German fell. Maro immediately withdrew, moving 200 yards south to a completely different position. The tomato tins remained where they were, still catching sunlight, still creating their patterns. 20 minutes later, German mortar fire saturated the area where Maro had been, over 40 rounds falling on empty forest. That afternoon, he refined the technique. He punched different hole patterns to create different light effects. He painted some tins with mud to create contrast at certain angles. He developed a more sophisticated remote system using fishing line and small pulleys salvaged from parachute cord. By evening, he had demonstrated enough for the concept to be taken seriously. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Stewart listened to the briefing, with growing attention. We have identified at least 20 German sniper positions in this sector. We are losing men daily. If your technique can reduce those casualties, I will give you whatever resources you need." He paused. "How many do you think you can eliminate in 4 days?" Maro considered the question carefully. "Sir, if the Germans do not adapt quickly, and if weather remains clear, perhaps 30 to 40. That assumes I can maintain unpredictability." "You have 4 days," Stewart said. "I'll assign you a dedicated security team of 6 men. Your only mission is to eliminate enemy snipers and observers using whatever methods produce results. After 4 days, we assess." February 21st began with extensive preparation. Maro identified 9 primary firing positions with clear sight lines to known German locations, ranging from 300 to 800 yards. Each required different tin configurations based on sun angle, terrain, and the layout of German defenses. He was thinking the way he had always thought while trapping, reading the ground, anticipating movement, positioning himself where the animal would be rather than where it currently was. The first significant result came at 8:15 in the morning. Maro had arranged 5 tins in an irregular pattern facing German lines and was operating them through his string system in a deliberate sequence, the leftmost tin catching light for 3 seconds, then darkness for 5, then the center tin for 2. The pattern repeated. Through his scope, watching German positions 600 yards distant, Maro saw movement after the second repetition. 3 German soldiers emerged from a concealed bunker entrance. One was pointing toward the tin positions. Another raised binoculars. The third appeared to be riding, an intelligence officer most likely, documenting what he believed was a new Allied signaling method. Maro had positioned himself at a 70-degree angle from the tins. The Germans were focused entirely on the light source, never considering that the threat was coming from the flank. His first shot hit the soldier with the binoculars in the chest. His second shot, 3 seconds later, took the man with the notebook. The third German dropped immediately and survived. 2 confirmed kills at 600 yards in under 10 seconds. By evening, February 21st had produced 11 confirmed kills. German forces trained to counter conventional threats had no tactical framework for handling what Maro had introduced: weaponized curiosity. February 22nd brought the engagement that would become the defining action of the entire operation. Maro had identified a German position in the ruins of a stone farmhouse approximately 735 yards northeast of Canadian lines. This position had been responsible for at least 9 Canadian casualties. The sniper using it was exceptional. He never fired more than twice from the same location inside the building, maintained perfect patience, and had survived multiple Canadian counter-sniper efforts. Several attempts to locate and engage him had produced nothing. Maro spent the evening of the 21st studying the farmhouse. The German had at least 4 firing positions connected by interior passages. The windows were carefully camouflaged. The approaches were covered by machine gun positions that made direct assault a guarantee of failure. Standard tomato tin technique would not work against a sniper this experienced. A professional of that caliber would not investigate random light anomalies. The solution came from understanding German tactical priorities. Their snipers were not purely killers. They were intelligence assets. They documented Allied movements, equipment positions, and preparation activity. What would force such a professional to break his own cover? Maro constructed what he called the artillery observer deception. He positioned tins to create light patterns that mimicked Canadian forward observer signaling. He had his security team move conspicuously with radio equipment and surveying instruments that suggested artillery spotting activity, measuring distances, consulting maps, appearing to coordinate with unseen rear elements. The tin patterns were timed to create light flashes that appeared to relay coordinates between the fake observers and positions further back. From a German sniper's perspective, this scenario represented an immediate tactical emergency. Canadian artillery observers preparing a fire mission could not be ignored. They had to be documented, photographed if possible, and ideally eliminated before they could direct fire onto German positions. The sniper would have to act. Maro positioned himself 500 yards west of the deception with an unobstructed line of sight to the farmhouse. He settled in and waited. The February cold was severe. His fingers went numb despite his gloves. He controlled his breathing and held position with the patience he had learned trapping in Quebec winters, where the animal either came or it did not, and impatience solved nothing. At 11:47, he detected movement in the farmhouse. A window shutter, previously closed, opened 3 inches. It was barely perceptible. Maro's eye caught it. He studied the opening through his scope. Darkness inside, nothing visible, but something was there. He waited. At 11:53, light glinted inside the window. Glass, a scope or binoculars catching a fragment of sunlight. The German sniper was observing the fake artillery spotters. Maro made microscopic adjustments. Range, 735 yards. Wind, approximately 6 miles per hour from the west. He would need to hold 18 inches left and 24 inches high. At 11:56, the German sniper shifted position inside the farmhouse. For perhaps 2 seconds, his face was visible in the window opening, a dark shape against a darker background, barely distinguishable as human. Maro fired. The .303 round covered 735 yards in approximately 2.5 seconds. It passed through the window opening and struck the German sniper in the head. Canadian patrols searching the farmhouse the following morning found detailed sniper logs documenting 37 Canadian casualties, extensive equipment, and the body of a Hauptfeldwebel identified as a decorated veteran of the Eastern Front. That afternoon, the tactical situation changed. German forces, having lost their primary sniper, multiple observers, and a mounting number of soldiers to causes they could not adequately explain, began adapting. Forward positions received strict orders. Do not investigate unusual light phenomena. Report them through channels, but do not expose yourself. Pull back all forward observers. Maro recognized the countermeasure immediately. If the Germans refused to investigate, his tins became inert. Passive resistance would neutralize the entire technique. The solution was escalation. If they would not investigate light patterns, he needed to create situations they could not ignore without accepting unacceptable risk to their own defensive integrity. February 23rd opened with Maro deploying 12 tins instead of his usual 5 or 6. He positioned them to create what appeared to be a coordinated signal network, suggesting major Canadian attack preparation. The patterns were not random flashes. They mimicked tactical communication, what appeared to be grid coordinates timing sequences, unit identification signals. This was not unexplained light. This was simulated operational intelligence that German command could not afford to dismiss. The technique worked with devastating effect. By midday, German forces had sent out reconnaissance teams to document the signals, positioned intelligence officers to coordinate analysis, and deployed observers to record what was happening. Each investigation created an opportunity. Each exposure was followed by a shot. The German regimental commander facing Maro's sector, Oberstleutnant Wilhelm Krause, grew increasingly desperate. His war diary, recovered after the battle, documented the deterioration in clinical terms that barely concealed the panic beneath them. Enemy employs unknown signaling methods with light devices. Our attempts to document these signals result in casualties. Sniper fire of extraordinary precision eliminates all observers. Unable to determine whether signals are genuine tactical communication or elaborate deception. Troop morale declining. Men fear investigating anything unusual. Defensive coordination degrading. February 24th produced Maro's highest single-day count, 34 confirmed kills. He had developed multiple variants of the technique by this stage, a resupply signal pattern suggesting Canadian supply drops were being coordinated. An infiltration sequence creating lights that appeared to guide night patrols through German lines. A tank coordination pattern simulating signals for armored movements. Each deception was constructed around a specific German fear. Each forced a response. Each response created an exposure. Each exposure was answered with precision at whatever range the ground required. The psychological damage exceeded the casualty figures. A diary recovered from a dead Gefreiter captured the mental state of German soldiers in the sector during these 4 days. The Canadians have something that creates ghost lights that kill. Officers forbid investigation, but we must know what the lights mean. 7 men in my company dead investigating lights that disappear. I see lights when I close my eyes. I no longer trust what is real. February 25th brought the technique to its fullest expression. Maro achieved 41 confirmed kills. He had perfected every element: timing, positioning, remote operation, pattern sequencing. His security team functioned without requiring direction. The tomato tins, now numbering over 30, in positions across several hundred yards, created a web of deception that German forces could not navigate without incurring casualties at every attempt. The defining engagement of the day came at 14:15. Maro had arranged tins to suggest a major Canadian assault was imminent. German forces, interpreting the light patterns as genuine attack preparation signals, began repositioning their defenses. This required officers to move between positions to coordinate their men. It required them to be visible, even briefly, to the men they were directing. Over the following 3 hours, Maro and his security team engaged targets as they presented themselves. 17 German soldiers fell. 4 were officers. One was a major whose death produced command paralysis that degraded his entire defensive sector's cohesion for the next 48 hours. That evening, Stuart summoned Maro to battalion headquarters. "Your 4 days are up. Current count is 109 confirmed kills, with observers verifying 94. That is not simply effective, it is unprecedented in Canadian sniper operations." Stuart paused. "Division headquarters wants immediate documentation of your techniques. They are considering implementation across the entire 1st Canadian Army. General Crerar himself wants a briefing. He looked at Maro directly. How confident are you that other snipers can replicate this? Maro was quiet for a moment before answering. Sir, the tins are only tools. Any man can punch holes in metal. But understanding German psychology, knowing what they cannot afford to ignore, forcing them to choose between danger and blindness, that requires thinking like a trapper, not a soldier, the tins work because they make Germans solve puzzles their training never prepared them for. To teach this, I must teach men to think like hunters first. Stuart nodded. Then you will teach. But first, weather shows clear skies tomorrow. I want to know the absolute maximum effectiveness of this technique before we standardize it. One more day, Maro. February 26th opened with deteriorating visibility. Morning fog obscured the sun, eliminating the technique's primary mechanism entirely. Maro had prepared for this contingency. If light would not work, he would use sound. Canadian Supply had provided empty jerrycan fuel containers that resonated clearly when struck. Maro positioned these on stakes and in trees filled with small rocks. Using his string system, he could shake them remotely, producing metallic rattling that carried across the frozen battlefield. Sounds that resembled equipment being moved, weapons being handled, vehicles maneuvering in the tree line. The technique worked through different mechanisms but achieved the same result. German soldiers investigating unexpected mechanical sounds exposed themselves. Some believed the sounds indicated Canadian infiltration teams moving through the sector. Others concluded supply operations were underway. All investigations created targeting opportunities. By 1400, Maro had added 17 confirmed kills. The final kill came at 1535. A German officer, moving between defensive positions to reorganize his scattered company, paused to investigate a jerrycan rattling in a pattern that made no meteorological sense. His men had been reporting strange sounds throughout the day. He needed to determine whether Canadians were infiltrating his sector or whether exhaustion and fear had pushed his soldiers past reliable observation. He stood partially exposed for approximately 8 seconds, studying the direction the sounds came from. Maro's shot at 680 yards struck him in the chest. At 1600 hours, exactly 4 days after beginning the operation, Maro withdrew from forward positions. His final count stood at 137 confirmed kills, with observers verifying 119. The intelligence assessment filed on February 27th documented the operation in the measured language of official reporting. But the underlying significance was impossible to conceal. Corporal Maro employed innovative psychological warfare techniques to neutralize enemy positions with unprecedented effectiveness. Using improvised light and sound devices, he forced enemy personnel to expose themselves for observation and targeting. Results: 137 confirmed enemy casualties, 73 verified as sniper, observer, or intelligence personnel, 21 confirmed as officers or senior NCOs, estimated 500 enemy man-hours wasted investigating false signatures, enemy intelligence gathering capability degraded by approximately 70 to 80%. Psychological impact on enemy morale, severe. German defensive coordination disrupted. Recommend immediate promotion, decoration, and reassignment to training duties. Methodology merits urgent documentation for wider implementation. The German reaction revealed the operation's true depth of impact. Oberstleutnant Krause's final diary entry before his unit was pulled from the line: "The Canadian ghost sniper has destroyed my regiment's effectiveness. 41 men killed investigating inexplicable phenomena that appear and disappear. Officers terrified to expose themselves. Soldiers refuse reconnaissance missions. Men reporting hallucinations of lights and sounds. Defensive posture has collapsed. Cannot maintain sector control under these conditions. Request immediate relief." The German intelligence assessment that followed attempted to analyze the situation with characteristic precision. Enemy has developed sophisticated sniper tactics, employing advanced deception methods. Light signals and acoustic devices draw forces into prepared ambush positions. Conventional counter-sniper doctrine proves ineffective. Recommend all units enforce absolute discipline regarding investigation of unusual phenomena. Any unexplained light or sound must be reported through chain of command, but not investigated by forward personnel. This directive supersedes all previous intelligence gathering protocols. That directive revealed the essential truth of what Maro had accomplished. He had forced the enemy into an impossible choice: investigate potential threats and die, or ignore them and operate blind. Either option degraded German effectiveness. The German army, built on aggressive initiative and meticulous intelligence gathering, had been reduced to passive acceptance of mysterious phenomena in their own defensive sectors. Maro spent 3 weeks recovering at a rear echelon facility. Canadian medical officers diagnosed acute combat fatigue, 4 days of sustained high-stress independent operations, maintaining absolute concentration for hours at a stretch in extreme cold, had taken a severe toll. During recovery, he wrote the detailed documentation that Canadian Army Headquarters had requested. His after-action report, titled "Employment of Improvised Deception Devices in Counter-Sniper Operations, Lessons from the Rhineland Campaign," became required reading at Commonwealth sniper schools. An excerpt from the report captured his underlying philosophy. The tomato tin technique succeeds because it exploits enemy training against them. German forces are disciplined to observe, document, and respond to tactical signatures. By creating false signatures that mimic legitimate tactical activity, we force response cycles that expose them to fire. The critical element is understanding what the enemy cannot afford to ignore. A random light means nothing. A light pattern suggesting artillery spotting, attack coordination, or infiltration guidance cannot be ignored without accepting unacceptable operational risk. We weaponize their professionalism against them. By April 1945, British and Canadian sniper teams across the Western Front were implementing variations of Maro's techniques. Improvised light reflectors became so prevalent that supply officers began issuing polished metal plates designed specifically for the purpose, officially designated deception devices, Mark I, which became standard sniper equipment through the war's final months. Maro himself never returned to frontline operations. In March 1945, he received orders to the Canadian Army Training Center at Aldershot as a sniper instructor. For the remainder of the war, he trained over 200 Commonwealth snipers, consistently emphasizing creativity, psychological warfare, and the critical importance of thinking beyond conventional doctrine. His teaching broke sharply from traditional British military instruction. Rather than emphasizing marksmanship fundamentals alone, Maro taught conceptual problem-solving. The rifle is merely a tool for delivering the solution, he told each class. Your actual weapon is your mind. The enemy trains to counter known threats. Your mission is to become an unknown threat they cannot prepare for. German training documents captured in May 1945 showed that German High Command had developed specific countermeasures and issued theater-wide directives in response to what one corporal had done in 4 days. All personnel are forbidden from investigating unusual light phenomena without explicit authorization from officers of company grade or higher. All investigations must be conducted using minimum personnel from maximum cover, with supporting fires prepared. All unusual acoustic signatures are to be assumed enemy deception until proven otherwise through indirect observation methods. When an enemy develops specific doctrine to counter your technique and distributes it to every formation in the theater, you have done something that genuinely altered their behavior. That was Maro's strategic achievement, measured not in the 137 kills, but in the evidence that German High Command felt compelled to rewrite their standard operating procedures because of what one Canadian corporal had done with garbage and sunlight. Jacques Maro was promoted to sergeant in April 1945 and received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and exceptional initiative while serving as a scout sniper, Sergeant Maro employed extraordinary tactical innovation to neutralize enemy positions with devastating effectiveness, demonstrating the highest standards of courage, creativity, and devotion to duty." He remained in the Canadian Army until 1949, serving primarily in training roles. He then returned to Quebec, settling in Trois-Rivières, where he worked as a wilderness guide and hunting instructor for 35 years. He rarely discussed his wartime service. In a 1986 interview with a Canadian military historian, he reflected on the 4 days in the Rhineland with the characteristic understatement of a man who had seen enough to know what actually mattered. People focus on the number 137. That is not what mattered to me. What mattered was that I survived when Etienne did not. What mattered was that I helped other Canadian boys get home to their families. The Germans I killed, they were somebody's sons too, somebody's brothers. They fought for their country the same as me. War makes killing necessary. It does not make killing good. The interviewer asked whether he felt proud of the tactical innovation he had created. Maro was quiet for a moment. Pride is the wrong word. I feel grateful that I could think clearly when others needed me to. I feel satisfied that the idea worked and saved Canadian lives. But proud. Pride is for things that make the world better. War only makes the world less terrible for one side. That is achievement. That is not pride. Maro died in November 2008 at 86 years old in Trois-Rivières. His obituary mentioned his military service briefly and focused at length on his 50 years teaching young people wilderness survival and hunting ethics. Former students remembered him as patient, philosophical, and always insisting that hunting was about respect for the animal and the land, not about the kill. His number 4 Lee Enfield and 3 tomato tins, dented and rusted, recovered from the Moyland Wood battlefield by a German Historical Preservation Society in 2011, are displayed today at the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. The placard reads, "These ordinary objects, transformed by extraordinary thinking, represent the innovative spirit that characterized Canadian forces in the Second World War." The underlying principle that Maro demonstrated in 4 days in the Rhineland has not changed in the 8 decades since. Observe the enemy, understand their training and their priorities, identify what they cannot afford to ignore, then weaponize their response patterns against them. Modern applications in electronic warfare, cyber operations, and information warfare all trace conceptual lineage to exactly this logic. Create false signatures that force responses, then exploit those responses for advantage. But the human core of it remains what Maro articulated in that 1986 interview in the plainest possible language. I did not do anything special or heroic. I simply looked at my problem from a different angle than my training suggested. The Germans were good soldiers, experienced, disciplined, dangerous. I could not beat them at their own game using their own methods. So I changed the game entirely. I made them play a game they had never trained for. That is all. Nothing heroic. Just different thinking. 4 days, 137 confirmed kills, and a lesson that military institutions have been trying to teach ever since, that the side that wins is often not the side with the better equipment or the larger army, but the side that thinks more creatively about the problem it faces. A Canadian corporal with a bayonet, a food tin, and 3 hours of winter sunlight proved it with mathematical precision in the Reichswald forest in February 1945.